Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. If you're tuned in, then you're very welcome. And you are welcome to, specifically, the Lowestoft History Sessions with Ivan Bunn. Now, we are currently on episode number 11, and we have 10 very fine episodes of Lowestoft History Sessions available to be viewed on either Facebook or YouTube. Whichever is your preferred platform, do scroll back through on our Facebook page or our YouTube channel and have a good look, and you can see all of the previous episodes available for your viewing pleasure. But tonight's session is a very special one. As I said, it's with Ivan Bunn, presented by Ivan Bunn. It's a fantastic and fascinating episode, and it's titled Cromwell and Lowestoft. And I think you can guess what the subject matters will be. Mainly Cromwell, mainly Lowestoft. And Ivan will take us through some of that particular history in a very, very interesting way, as he always does. Now, we'll just give you some of the background that you need to know. This is hosted by the Rogues Shanty Chorus, and the Rogues Shanty Chorus is a fishing choir made up of people from the Lowestoft area or surrounding areas. That they gather at the Seagull Theatre in Pakefield on alternate Tuesday nights to sing their hearts out with like-minded people, specifically sea shanties and songs associated with the sea and the industry of fishing, particularly maritime songs, whaling ballads, naval ballads, old wrecking songs and murder ballads, and very, very importantly, the working sea shanty songs of our stretch of coastline, as well as further afield. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to meet due to the obvious factors, being COVID-19, since sometime in March. So we've been conducting those sessions online right here on this Facebook page or this YouTube channel all the way back since I believe it's the 16th or 17th of March. And we've been conducting them weekly instead of our normal fortnightly sessions. That means anybody can join in, and we really encourage anybody does. That would take place on a Tuesday night. You're very welcome to join us, or once again, they're available to view retrospectively. Please do enjoy them. But what we really need you to do on a Monday evening history session or a Tuesday evening shanty session is to please click share. So if you share this particular session on your feed, on your wall, what it means is that we can reach people that perhaps wouldn't otherwise know that we are doing such a thing. They wouldn't be able to taste the delights of Lowestoft as Mr. Ivan Bunn sets them out. So anybody that can click share, we would be so grateful to them for that reason. And I know also very, very grateful would be the People's Health Trust that help to fund these sessions and help to keep us engaging with our audience throughout lockdown and this period of an epidemic. Now, 3 people have got in touch already to say they're here and viewing. One is Bill Kitchen. He says hello again from Brightlingsea. Well, hello, Bill. Lovely to know that you're out there and enjoying it already. Also, one from Galston says hello from Galston, and that's Chris Collins. Hello, Chris. Glad to see you there. Both of the above are regulars to our broadcasts. And finally, so far, one more from Linda Boyce. Good evening from Alton Broad. Well, we've got 3 very fine places. Brightlingsea, beautiful, beautiful stretch. Galston and Alton Broad, a little bit more closer to home, but just as lovely. We've also got young Tara Kitchener, who says, "All right, boy." She says it in an accent peculiar, and I do mean peculiar accent, to our lovely stretch of coastline. But somewhat further afield is Susan Corkmash. Hello, everyone. And that's very, very inclusive. Jerry Poole, simply says hello. Hello, Jerry. Lovely to know you're out there. Now, a few other people I would like to say hello to is, in particular, Claire. Claire got in touch with us. We know Claire very well. And this is Claire Garrett, of course. Claire said, "Hi, Paul. We're showing one of Ivan's talks this afternoon to the residents, and they really responded well." Now, by residents, she means the residents of a Barchester care home where she works. And that's just fantastic for us to know that Ivan is reaching people that perhaps wouldn't be able to get out to one of his talks, or certainly wouldn't be able to get out to one of our shanty sessions. But it means that we can take Ivan into their home digitally, as it were. Now, without any further ado, I'm going to say hello to Ivan and bring him bring him right up into your grills. And here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ivan Bunn.
Good evening, everybody. Nice to be back. Another week has flown very quickly. I trust you're all well and hanging in there, as they say. It's nice to be with you again. Good evening, Paul, by the way.
Good evening, mate.
Yeah. Good evening to everybody who's tuned in there, particularly Jerry, Susan, Bill, and I forget the rest of them now. But anyway, it's nice to know you're tuned in to us, and I'm looking forward to another session tonight, which I hope you'll enjoy. And I hope the subject is one, I'll come more about the subject in a minute, but it's one that's kind of faded. It's just gone into the folklore of Lowestoft. It's the day when Oliver Cromwell actually came to town, and it's a fact. And I did a lot of background research into this some years ago, and there's not a tremendous amount of factual contemporary information, primary source material, as historians like to call it, available. I trawled through as much as I can, and using that tonight, I want to try and fill in some of the gaps, give you some idea of exactly, well, not exactly because I haven't got a time machine, but roughly what happened in March 1643. That's my intention tonight. If I can just explain as well, might be a slightly shorter presentation than normal. I hear a big sigh of relief go round. I'm going to, next Monday, all things being well, I intend to leave out a very important, include a very important part of our community here that hasn't been covered. I'm doing a two-part talk, so that'll be next Monday and the Monday after, and it's a detailed history of Alton Broad, starting 12,000 years ago. I can't quite remember that far back, and coming right through to the present day. So that's just what I intend to do next Monday, and all things being well, the Monday after with the second part. So that's really me just saying hi.
Very nice indeed. I'm just going to read a couple more comments, if you don't mind, because everybody's saying hello to you. They're also saying hello to each other, which is lovely. Lovely to know it's a bit of a community affair, and everybody's engaging with one another. We have hello from Terry Unit. He says, evening all. Steve Fingleton says, hi all from Carlton Colville. And Charlie Moore says, good evening from the Moors. I'm Beccles. She's not Beccles. She's not all of Beccles. She's just part of Beccles. And Susan says, hello, Ivan. Susan Corkmash, if that's pronounced correctly. We've got Eddie Godwin. Hi. Hi to Eddie. Nice to see you there, mate. And Spencer, good evening. Well, good evening, Anne. And Jerry Paul is in Alton Broad. She says, excellent. And Alton Broad is excellent because that will be, as Ivan said, the subject for the next two history sessions, Lowestoft history sessions, and that will commence on the 10th of August, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, my mental arithmetic does serve me well at times. And we're really looking forward to that. But I'm particularly tickled pink about Cromwell and Lowestoft. So without further ado, Ivan, I'm going to switch over to the PowerPoint presentation view, and just I'm going to strap in and enjoy it, to be honest, because I can't wait.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody. Say welcome again to everybody who's kind of tuned in since I said hello. So if we can just start the slideshow, please. Here we go. And I'll try and fill in some detail for you. I've called the talk Oliver Cromwell Lowestoft and the Curfew Bell. I'll bring the Curfew Bell in at the end of this. It's quite interesting little end note, really, with some unanswered questions. So it's a fact that Oliver Cromwell did come here, and as I said in my introduction a few minutes ago, there isn't a tremendous amount of primary source material. I've trawled up as much as I can, and I've taken the story a little bit beyond Lowestoft to show how it's sort of all encompassing in a way, this small incident, although I'm sure if you were in Lowestoft on that particular March day in 1643 when Cromwell arrived with his soldiers, it probably wasn't such a little incident at the time. So we'll push on to the next slide, please, Paul. And the story, the primary source material locally, there's only one primary source material, and that's a note that was left 3 years later, after he returned to Lowestoft after being arrested, by Jacob Rouse, who was the rector of Lowestoft at that time. And in the parish registers of Lowestoft, when he returned after his arrest and exile, he actually left a little note to explain why the parish registers weren't complete, why people had to go out and baptize each other because they were missing the rector to do that for them. Excuse me while I just have a little drink. All right, with a second or two, the parish registers should come up. So here's St Margaret's Church Parish Register, the page in question. These are the originals are kept at the Norfolk Record Office. There's the reference of the document. And the note that Jacob Rouse left is up in the top right-hand corner. I've enlarged it there. I don't expect you to read it. It is in English, but it's a very, very poor copy. So I've actually, through the magic of technology, I'm going to have to get a bit closer to read the screen here. This is actually what Jacob Rouse, the rector of Lowestoft, wrote in 1846, in June 1846, over 3 years after Cromwell came. I'll read it out to you in case the screen is small and you can't see it. So he writes, "Reader, whoever thou art, that shall have occasion to peruse these pages, know that by this means, for the 2 following years to come, to be so imperfect as thou findest it. On the 13th of March, 1643, Colonel Cromwell, with a brigade of horse and certain foot, which he had from Yarmouth, we'll come back to that, came to this town, and from thence carried away prisoners, Sir Thomas Barker and his brother, Sir John Petters, Mr. Nivet of Ashfellthorpe, Mr. Catline, Captain Hammond, Mr. Thomas Corley, with others to Cambridge, and with myself, Mr. Thomas Allen, Mr. Simon Cannon, and Thomas Cannon of this town, so that for some time following there was in this town neither minister nor clerk, but the inhabitants were enforced to procure now one and then another to baptize their children, by which means there was no register kept. Only those who hereafter mentioned were by myself baptized in those intervals when I enjoyed my freedom." Here written, Scripsy, June the 1st, Anno Domini 1646, Jacob Rouse. That's the only local contemporary primary source that records his visit to Cromwell's visit to Lowestoft. Now, if we could go to the next slide, please. What I want to do at this point, I just want to give a background to the First English Civil War and how it came about, so we can see what led to Cromwell needing to come, or feeling that he needs to come to Lowestoft to arrest strangers. So I'll start with this my written notes that I've got here. If you could just click the slide for me, please. Thank you. So on the 27th of March 1625, Charles I became the King of Great Britain and Ireland. He believed in the divine right of kings, believing that he derived his authority from God and not from his subjects. He decided to rule without a parliament and did so from 1629 to 1640. As he had no parliament to give him money, he had to tax the country directly himself. One onerous tax he imposed on 3 occasions was ship money to pay for the building of new ships for the Navy. This angered many people, especially those who didn't live near the coast, for obvious reasons. Charles also had many arguments with Parliament, when he tried to pass new laws to give greater control of government to them and reduce his powers. 4th of January 1642, the King burst into the House of Commons with a troop of soldiers to arrest 5 members of Parliament he accused of treason. They all escaped and Charles fled to Oxford with his supporters, leaving London in the hands of Parliament. In March 1642, Parliament proclaims the Militia Order, which enabled it to take control of the militia, virtually the only armed body of soldiers in the country. Propositions were issued by Parliament in the hopes of reaching a settlement with the King. They wanted him to recognise their own supremacy, that ministers and judges should be appointed by Parliament and not by the King, and also that all church and military matters should come under the control of Parliament. Charles raised, in the 22nd of August 1642, Charles raised his standard at Nottingham, formally declaring war on Parliament and its supporters, and the civil war broke out between the Roundheads, supporters of Parliament, and the Cavaliers, supporters of the King. On the 23rd of October 1642 was fought the Battle of Edge Hill. Both sides claimed the victory. In fact, I suppose in modern parlance it was a draw. 20th of December 1642, the Parliamentary Eastern Association was formed by all the militias of Suffolk, Norfolk, Essex, Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire. During the winter of 1642-43, it established parliamentary control over East Anglia. One of the units which first became part of this association's army was a troop of horse raised by Oliver Cromwell, a member of Parliament and a devout Puritan. In December that same year, he was promoted from captain to a colonel and was given command of a regiment of horse consisting of 5 troops. Okay, he was in Norwich at the beginning of 1643 with his regiment, was Cromwell, and the question is now begged really is why he decided something was going down, as they say, in Lowestoft at that time. Now, after the Battle of Edge Hill, there were quite a lot of small uprisings, if you like, of royalists against the parliamentary forces throughout the country. And Cromwell was led to believe, possibly it was the truth, that such a revolt was being plotted in dear old Lowestoft, because a number of strangers to the town, all of whom were royalists, were gathering in the town. There was about 18 of them, including some local people, and so we can let a contemporary, if we could change slides please, I can show you the original document that I got this from. This is from the Parliamentary Papers. No, I haven't, I jumped the gun. I just want to show you, give you a very brief idea of what Lowestoft was like, or how big or small Lowestoft was in March 1643. or in the 17th century. Really. So here's a modern map of Lowestoft. We strip away from that all the bits that are not Lowestoft, all the adjoining parishes. So that's the actual extent of the parish of Lowestoft that you can see on there. But there was none of the houses that you see. There was only this small town on the cliff top, approximately 2,000 men, women and children. That's that pink area that you can see there. That's the parish of Lowestoft, with the town perched precariously on the top of the cliff. As I say, a small town of roughly 2,000 men, women and children. And here you can see, I'm sure some of you are familiar with these maps. I have used them in other talks. My talks do tend to overlap a little bit, simply because nothing happens in isolation. And so this is the map of Lowestoft, the town, in 1618, probably no different in 1643. At the top, you can see a triangular bit of land there. That's where Bellevue Park is today. Follow the main road, the high street, all the way down, continuing all the way down. Then just at the bottom there, you come to Old Nelson Street, where that great big roundabout is, taking you out onto Battery Green Road. To the west, that's to the left if you look at the map. If you're familiar with Lowestoft, did you know where the first and last pub is? That, in actual fact, is the most westerly pub in the town. So there's a triangular of land, and along the bottom of the cliff, look at the ravines, the fish houses, smoke houses, storehouses, and all the other buildings associated with the fishing industry. So if we can move on to the next slide now. So we come to Lowestoft. It was Tuesday, the 14th of March, 1643. And here you can see a early little sketch of the town, looking from the sea, from a 17th century helicopter, looking straight into the town. A very small town at the time. And this is in actual fact the first official report that crops up in Parliament about what happened. It's a letter dated the 17th of March. That's 3 days later. It's sent from Norwich, from a Norwich merchant named John Corey to Sir John Potts, and it was read out in Parliament. Today we have, I think it's Hansard, the publication that shows you all of the business that's carried on in the House of Commons there. Back in the 17th century, it was another publication called the Perfect Diurnal, and passages from Parliament. And this is the printed letter that Corey sent to Potts to be read out in Parliament. And I'll read it out to you because it's not easy to read on that small screen. So Corey writes, last night, that's the night of Monday the 13th of March, from Yarmouth, letters from Yarmouth informed the Colonel, that's Colonel Cromwell, that they had that day made stay, that's arrested, Sir John Wentworth, he owned and lived at Somerleyton Hall, and one Captain Allen from Lowestoft. These are both Royalist supporters who had come thither to change dollars. Obviously they were going to go over to Holland, both of whom are yet secured. And further, and here's the clue as to why Cromwell got the wind up about Lowestoft, and further, that the town of Lowestoft had received in divers many strangers, and was fortifying itself. The Colonel advised that no man might go in or out of the gates of Norwich that night, And the next morning, between 5 and 6, that's early hours of the 14th of March, Captain between I just lost my place there now. Yeah, Cromwell marched out with 5 troops of horse, soldiers on footback. There was Captain Fountain and Captain Richards and 80 Norwich volunteers. So Captain Fountain and Captain Richards both had a company of militia soldiers with them, and 80 Norwich volunteers. He marched towards Lowestoft, where he was to meet with the Yarmouth volunteers, who brought 4 or 5 pieces of ordnance. I can just you imagine that. There's Cromwell with his horse soldiers, 5 troops of horse soldiers, the militia soldiers, 80 Norfolk volunteers, marching out to Yarmouth, which is stoutly on the side of Parliament, and saying, we're now going to have a go at Lowestoft. Does anybody want to join us? I would imagine there was quite a lot of Yarmouth men who said, yep, we'll be with you, and we got some cannon. So they brought 4 or 5 pieces of ordnance. The town of Lowestoft had blocked themselves up, all except where they had their ordnance, which were 3 pieces, before which a chain was drawn to keep off the horse. The colonel, having arrived, summoned the town and demanded if they would deliver up their strangers, the town and their army, promised to lend favour if so, if not, none. In fact, he threatened them, if you don't surrender the town to me and hand over all the strangers, you're going to be the worse for it. They yielded to deliver up their strangers, but not to deliver the town to them. Whereupon, so Mr. Corey tells them, our Norwich dragoons crept under the chain before mentioned and came with pistol shot of their ordnance, that's the Lowestoft guns, proffering to fire upon the cannoneer, who fled. So the Lowestoft men who manned the cannons, when the Norwich dragoons crawled under the chain that they put across the road, threatened to shoot them, ran off. And that was the end of it, really. He goes on to say, so they gained the 2 pieces of ordnance, although earlier they said there was 3, but they gained 2 pieces of ordnance, broke the chain, and they entered the town without more resistance, where presently 18 strangers yielded themselves. Mr. Brooke, the sometime minister of Yarmouth, and some others escaped over the river. There was a good store of pistols and other arms. I hear about 50 cases of pistols. The colonel stayed there Tuesday and Wednesday night. So he didn't just come and go on the same day. He was here Tuesday, Wednesday night, and left on the Thursday. So we come to the question a little bit later, or who will, as to exactly who these 18 strangers were in the town and what possibly was their purpose. So that's the first-hand account that we from a letter from John Corey that was read out in Parliament. So that's another primary source describing what happened. Differs a little bit more detailed than the note in the Parish Register, but nonetheless it gives a really good insight into it. So the next question is really, we've got a town, as I said, of 2,000 men, women and children. How many soldiers came with Cromwell to Lowestoft? And what impact just the sight and sound of them must have had on the town? It must have been pretty scary. So if we can just flick to the next slide, please, Paul. So here's Oliver Cromwell in his colonel's uniform. And we're told there were 5 troops of horse. A troop was 100 men, plus their officers and hangers-on, etc. But assuming, like most military units, they're never fully up to strength, through illness and that, we'll say each troop of horse had 100 men in it. So we got 500, probably 500 plus men, the dragoons, all on horseback with their presumably wearing their big round iron helmets, the round heads themselves. They came with Cromwell. As it was his troop of horse, he would have led them. Basically, it's a regiment. 5 troops making up his regiment, Colonel Cromwell's regiment of dragoons. And who else are we told are there? Well, if you click the slide for me again, please, Paul. So we had the only really trained soldiers, their militia. And so here's some of these people, obviously, are the reenactors. 2 companies of militia. Again, a company of militiamen was reckoned to be 100 men, plus officers and a few sort of support men, if you like. But again, we say it wasn't quite up to strength. So again, we'll look at, we'll say 100, 2 companies or so. That's another 200 plus men. So we've now got 700 men, 500 on horseback, 200 relatively trained militiamen. And then if we go to the next screen, please, we have local volunteers. These will be a raggle-taggle bunch of men who supported Parliament and were quite happy to support the cause by taking up arms on the sides of Parliament. We're told there's 80 from Norwich and an unknown number from Great Yarmouth. So goodness knows how many Yarmouth men decided to come there to go at Lowestoft. So we got 700, we got 780. If we got a couple of hundred men from Yarmouth, or possibly not as many as that, we're pushing 900 armed men coming to Lowestoft. And finally, we mustn't forget, of course, if we go to the last slide. Thank you. We're told there was 4 or 5 cannon with the crew. So we'll say there's 4 cannon came with a crew of 3, that's 12 men. But then, of course, you'd have to have the horses that pulled them, the men that led the horses, the gunpowder wagons also being pulled and trundling up at the rear. So I reckon we're looking somewhere in the region on that day in March in 1643, possibly upwards of 1,000 armed men descending on Lowestoft. That's part of half in number, half the population of the whole town that they were after. It must have been pretty scary. I don't wonder the cannoneer, when he was threatened to be shot by one of the by some of the Norwich dragoons, the horsemen, after creeping under the train, decided to scarper. You can just imagine him saying, "Well, this is getting serious. I'm going home." And so the town was taken without a fight, without any damage being done. So we go to the next slide, please. So we have this impressive force of men in the town. So these are the prisoners who were taken. Sir John Pettus, who came from Cheddar-ston, he was a colonel in the Royalist militia. Sir Thomas Barker of Trimley in Suffolk, his brother Sir Edward Barker. Thomas Knivet, more of whom in a moment, of Ashwell Thorpe, Norfolk. He was a captain of a regiment of Norfolk militia. There was Thomas Corey, a merchant from Norwich. Incidentally, the brother to John Corey, who wrote the letter to Parliament that we just had a look at, Captain John Hammond, who presumably, being a captain, was also from the Norfolk militia. Thomas Catlin of Norwich, he was actually the son of the MP for Norwich. Edward Catlin, his brother. Thomas Allen of Lowestoft, one of the wealthiest men in the town, a merchant and mariner. The Reverend Jacob Rice, who's the Vicar of Lowestoft, that's him who wrote that little account when he finally returned to Lowestoft in 1646. Reverend Richard Peters of Haddiscoe and Toft monks, Simon Cannon and his brother Thomas Cannon, both of Lowestoft, who were merchants. The question is, who are these people? Most of which appear to be royalist supporters. What were they doing in Lowestoft? Were they here hoping to get across to Holland out of the way to raise support for the royalist cause? Were they here to actually whip up the people in this corner of Suffolk to revolt against the Parliament and try and restore the king? Or were they here, as they claimed, they just all happened to be here at the same time? We will never know. Perhaps it was just a series of unfortunate events, really, that brought them together. One man in particular we'll have a look at in a minute, because he left some letters about this. This is Thomas Knivet of Ashwell of Norfolk, and we'll come back to him in a moment. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. By Edmund Greenwater, Lowestoft historian, in his historical account of Lowestoft, published in 1790, he also tells us what happened. Now, obviously, this is second-hand information now. Probably got it from the descendants of the men who 150 years earlier had been arrested, and the descendants of those who witnessed all this. And so we can just see what Greenwater writes about how he understood the events to play out. As I said, bear in mind, this is not a primary source. This is actually a secondary source. So we just have to take a little bit tongue-in-cheek, if you like, because we can't be certain 150 years after this event just how accurate it is. Well, here we go. I'll read it out to you once again. This is actually taken from his book. I just scanned these pages. Right. The inhabitants of Lowestoft, says Greenwater, as soon as they were warned on Oliver's approach, they were exceedingly alarmed and exerted their utmost efforts to put the town in a state of defence, and so to dispute his entrance. And in order to this purpose, 2 pieces of cannon were placed at the south end of the town, and 2 at the head, the top of Ragscore. But one of the principal inhabitants, and we'll come back to him in a minute, foreseeing the improbability of a design of this nature being attended with success, and also representing the extreme rashness of attempting it, i.e. to fight Cromwell and his forces with so inferior a force, as well as the great damage which the town would probably sustain from an unsuccessful opposition, so far prevailed with the inhabitants and the members of the association that they declined to the resolution of opposing Oliver's entrance into the town. Now, the principal inhabitant, we're told, was a wealthy merchant, Thomas Myhill. He could probably see that if they had to fight Cromwell, Cromwell would probably win, loot the town, smash up the town, and he would lose his livelihood. So Thomas Myhill, to his credit, a level-headed man, obviously, according to Greenwater, persuaded the townsfolk it would be silly to even think about fighting Oliver's men. This is slightly different to the contemporary account from Corey, who says that they did in actual fact put up a defence and were going to fight until the cannoneers ran away and the town surrendered. So that's Greenwater. He goes on with more information. Again, we're looking at a secondary source here. So if we could just flip slides again, please. We'll come back to him in a moment. So the two cannon, now this is where it differs from Corey's account, 3 days after the event. Greenwater tells us they put two cannon at the south end of Lowestoft, Old Nelson Street. This is a much later photograph. The road up until 1785 that you see, Old Nelson Street, didn't curl as you see in this one here. It just went straight ahead. So they put two cannon there, according to Greenwater. And if we go on to the next slide, this is at the head of Rant Score. This is where two, or according to Corley, 3 cannon were placed at the head of the score, and the chain was stretched over across the score to stop the horses riding up. And this is where the incident took place, where the dragoons crept under the chain, threatened to shoot the men who were manning the cannons. The men ran off, and basically the town surrendered. The cannon were dragged down a nearby lane to get to Rant Score, so we're told. And if we could just flick slides again for me, please. The lane, which is now gone, was Gun Lane. This is a view of Gun Lane in the early 20th, late 19th century, and judging by some of those houses, the age of some of those houses, certainly 2 of them that we can see there, those houses, if this is the road that they dragged the guns down, this is almost certainly these houses would have stood there at the time and would have actually witnessed the event. Gun Lane is still commemorated today. It was destroyed in the 1970s when all the masonettes were built, and this lane now commemorates the fact that the original Gun Lane was close to this spot, and to their credit, back in the day, the council decided to name this new road leading up to the back of the masonettes and the back of the houses in High Street, Gun Lane. So we do still have a Gun Lane in Lowestoft, which is directly associated with Cromwell's visit. So if we could change to the next slide, please. Well, I can't quite read that. I don't suppose we can take the headline, the Lowestoft headline off, can we? If not. Thank you. There we go. So we had Mayhew, the merchant, persuading the people that they shouldn't fight, and Greenwater goes on to tell us, in consequence of the pacific measures being adopted, Cromwell entered the town without any opposition and fixed his headquarters at the Swan Inn. While he was here, he sent for Sir John Pettus, who accordingly waited on him. After that, Cromwell had interrogated him very closely, respecting the designs of the counter-association, requested that he would inform him to which party it was that he intended to engage himself during these disputes. Sir John, without any duplicity or reservation, declared that he should act for the king. Oliver, so far from showing the least resentment against Sir John for his ingenuous declaration, highly applauded his frankness and sincerity, and dismissed him with assuring him that he sincerely wished that every man in the kingdom would be as open and sincere in declaring his real sentiments and intentions. So they seem to Cromwell, the parliamentarian, and Pettus, the royalist colonel, hit it off quite well in the Swan Inn. Greenwater also tells us and reinforces basically what Corey told us in his report. Cromwell, by the surrender of the town, became possessed of a considerable quantity of ammunition, saddles, pistols, and several pieces of cannon, as many as were sufficient for arming and supplying the necessaries of a considerable body of forces. So there is an intimation there that possibly something was being planned because of the amount of weapons that had been found in the town. We know from inventories from 50, 60 years later, most towns did carry a certain amount of weapons, and most men had weapons of some sort in their home, including armor. So it's possible that they just collected up everything that they could find in private houses and confiscated them and took them away along with the cannon. On the other hand, possibly we've got 3 royalist militia officers in the town, 2 from Norfolk and 1 from Suffolk, led by Pettus and other royalist support, that there was something going on behind the scenes here, possibly some sort of revolt against Parliament. We'll never know. It's open to contention, but we've got some other evidence that might well show that there wasn't a plot going on here as well. I'm going to come to that in a moment, but Cromwell, if we move on, please, Paul. So here we have the 2 men in question. Sir John Pettus of Cheddeston. He was only 30 years old in 1643. A typical royalist with his wigs and his finery. And then we have Oliver Cromwell, who was 14 years older than Sir John Pettus. And these are the 2 guys that met at the Swan Inn. And here we have a contemporary, it's not a contemporary, this is a later artist's impression of what the Swan Inn at Lowestoft probably looked like. There are no contemporary pictures, accounts of it whatsoever, so I can't really say this is an exact replica, but it's a typical live 17th century in probably, well, we know in Lowestoft it was certainly here in the late 16th century as well. And here's a lovely little drawing. Again, I don't know who did it and when it was done, but this is entitled Cromwell at the Swan Inn, March the 14th, 1642, Lowestoft. And I think Cromwell is meant to be the guy mounted on the horse still, that's looking directly at the person who's drawing the picture. As I said, these are not contemporary at all. These are to the incident. These are speculative drawings, but nonetheless, I think just give a little bit of a flavour to what was happening at the time and what it might just have looked like. The fella on the left, I said on the right, who's about to either get on his horse and get off his horse, looks as if he's about to do a little ballet dance around the town. It's a strange little drawing, that. But anyway, so this is an artist's impression. Now we go on now to the next slide, please. So where was the Swan Inn? This is the corner of which, again, everything changes. It's no longer Broadland Aquatics there, but it used to be Larry Cook's The Butcher's one. I was much younger. But this is the house, the three-storey building and shop that now stands on the site of the old Swan Inn in the High Street at Lowestoft, at the top of Mariners School. Mariners School back in the day was actually called Swan School because of the pub standing at the top. So there are, sorry, excuse me, there are, you can see a little bit of the old Swan Inn in its cellars. If we could just flick to the next slide, please. So down in the, I took these pictures back in the 1980s. These are the original 16th century staircase leading up from the cellar of the Swan Inn to the tap room above. And no doubt Cromwell had some ale or what have you while he was here, and possibly the landlord of the Swan brought ale or beer or wine up from the cellars up this original staircase. Just to give you some idea of the scope of it, my kids have got to hate me for this. It's my daughter and my son, and this was taken, I would say, for 1989. It's actually in the cellars of the old Swan Inn, under the modern building above, and obviously these cellars are still there, and are not in a very good state. At least they weren't the last time I had a look down them. So there is just this little tiny portion of the story, the physical side of it, the Swan Inn, that can still be seen. So we can push on to the next slide, please. Now this is man who was arrested here, and he's Thomas Livett, quite a wealthy man of Ashwell Thorpe in Norfolk, and he kept he spent a lot of time in London, and all the time he was away, wherever he was, he wrote copious letters home to his wife. And fortunately, he wrote letters to his wife when he was, after he was arrested in Lowestoft and carted off. And if we go to the next slide, so here's one of his letters. Now it's a little bit retrospective, and hopefully, right, I should be a bit closer to read that. So he writes in his diary and his letter book, in March 1643, being at Lowestoft, purposing to wait an opportunity to go over into Holland, this being the beginning of the fatal troubles of this nation, and at that time there being a high contest between the town of Yarmouth and the poor town of Lowestoft, which made them stand upon their guard to defend themselves against the threats of Yarmouth, but in no way in opposition to Parliament's authority and commands. But it so fell out, as I was in this town, Colonel Cromwell, the now Lord Protector, brought horse and foot against it, and upon his first summons, all the gentlemen strangers walked out of the town and yielded themselves without least opposition, whereof myself was one. So this is his first a note, a primary source of him actually being in the town. He says that he claims that Lowestoft were trying to defend themselves against the threats of Yarmouth because there was a lot of ill feeling between the towns, but in no way were they in opposition to Parliament and its commands. So he's actually gone against the common Cromwell, I should think, opinion that an uprising was in its infancy at Lowestoft. He himself, he come to Lowestoft to go across to Holland. He was a merchant, and that's the sort of thing that he would have done. So that's Liver. We're going to come back to him because he wrote some interesting letters during his imprisonment. But before we follow the prisoners, we just need to go somewhere else. So we can go to the next slide. Hopefully this will be the somewhere else. Somerleyton Hall. So John Wentworth, there's his bust from his memorial in Somerleyton Church. We don't know, I'm not certain who it was, but one of the stewards of his household, Wentworth had been arrested in Yarmouth, if you remember, so he's been carted away, and but obviously he had some staff at the hall, and there are a household book keeps a record, and we don't know who wrote it, but in it it says, upon the 14th day of March, 1642-43, that's using old new style there, being a Tuesday, Colonel Cromwell's troops and Captain Fontaine and his troops and divers others of the number of 140 came to Somerleyton Hall in the morning, and there they quartered that night, and a great part of them all Wednesday and Thursday till the afternoon. So this tallies exactly with what's happening, except Cromwell presumably after arresting the strangers in Lowestoft, dispatched Captain Fontaine and 140 soldiers from the soldiers in Lowestoft and sent them to Somerleyton Hall, presumably to see if there was, because Wentworth actually being a royalist, being any sign of weapons there. And if you go to the next slide, here's some of the copied notes that this person made. We don't know who, but he keeps, apparently the soldiers did loot quite a lot of stuff from the hall. And the following day, the 15th of March, on the Wednesday, he notes the 15th day of March, Colonel Cromwell's quartermaster took away from Somerleyton Hall, the house of Sir John Wentworth, Knight, 6 muskets worth 20 shillings for the musket, which comes to £6, and their bandoliers, 2 rests, value 6 shillings and 8pence, and 1 fowling piece worth 22 shillings, 12 headpieces, helmets, valued at 9 shillings the piece, comes to £5, 8 shillings. So the total of these arms comes to £12, 6 and 8pence. More at the same time, from the same place was taken, but by whom we know not, in gold, £160. Some of the soldiers nicked £160 in gold coin. The accounts also note that the soldiers stole or plundered from their horses 36 combs of oats for their horses, worth £8, 15 shillings, 4 combs of wheat and rye worth £3, 4 shillings, 3 loaves of grey peas worth £4, 9 bushels of barley worth 18 shillings, and it was reckoned that the quartering of over 100 soldiers for 2 days cost the hall £3, 6 and 8pence. The total was £183 worth of stuff that was either begged, borrowed or stolen. By today's reckoning, that would be just short of £13,000 worth of stuff that was actually looted from Somerleyton Hall. And of course we know the following day, on the Thursday, the 16th, everybody left with the prisoners, presumably the Cromwell moved to Somerleyton, picked up the men he'd sent there with their booty, and they made their way back to Norwich with their prisoners on the Thursday. So the whole story holds together nicely. So we go to the next slide, please. We know from reports in the Perfect Diurnal, the reports from Parliament, we are told that on the 18th of March, the prisoners were removed to Norwich. That's the date of the. So they probably arrived in Norwich on the 18th of March. They weren't there very long. If we go to the next slide, please. 2 days later, the prisoners, all the prisoners taken at Lowestoft, were then removed to Cambridge. And we know where they were lodged, imprisoned in Cambridge, because Mr. Liver, in one of his letters to his wife, writes on March the 23rd, "We are billeted in the Roos, the chiefest inn in the town of Cambridge. 16 of us together at 8 a meal. I know not how long we shall continue here." He's got a little bit of a wit about him, as this guy. I like him. And he goes on to say to his wife, "We read of our Lowestoft business in the Diurnal with much joy, because all false concerning dangerous plots or anything I ever was acquainted with. God of heaven forgive the devisers of these horrible lies to wrong innocent men." So to his wife, presumably, because he was an innocent man, why should he write a private letter? Unless, of course, his letters were being intercepted and read before they were forwarded to his wife, but he's protesting his innocence there. So we push on to the next slide, please. The case of the prisoners being held taken at Lowestoft, being held at Cambridge, was brought up in Parliament, and on the 22nd of April 1643, the Perfect Diurnal records that by order of the House of Commons, the prisoners are removed to Windsor. And there you see outlined on the original document, and by enlargement of it there, the prisoners were to be received into the castle at Windsor, and they tell you the name of who was going to guard them there. And so they're taken in custody, and they were actually incarcerated in the apartments that were reserved and were lived in by some of the poor knights of Windsor Castle, as they were called. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So here's a contemporary plan of there, and my little red arrow there points to where the lodgings were of the poor knights of Windsor. This is where the prisoners taken at Lowestoft were locked up. They don't seem to have been treated badly. In fact, they seem to be treated quite well. And it's from these apartments that Liver writes a number of letters to his wife. And again, if you could just click me once, Paul, please. He writes on April the 22nd, again, slightly tongue-in-cheek. I do like this guy. He writes to his wife, "We are all poor knights of Windsor. They have lodged us in their houses. Poor men, they have turned them out and put us in, and ere long we shall be as poor as they. We had but 2 rooms for 7 of us the first night, and but 1 bed for us all. I hope you will say that we lay like pig hogs indeed. We are since better accommodated, thanks to the good women here, who are full of courtesy. Yet still 7-2 are 2 rooms and a shitting house." At least I got a toilet. "I was forced to leave all my clothes at Cambridge, so far I shall be lousy before I get any change." So he's writing to his wife. He's not really complaining. He's kind of, in a way, joking just a little bit. Well, we have got 2 rooms in the shitting house. It can't be that bad. although he's frightened he's going to his clothes are going to become lousy. So you just click me one more time, please, Paul. He then tells his wife in another letter, he starts off, from our palace at Windsor Castle, my fellow prisoners present their services to you by name: Sir William Denny, Sir Thomas Barker, Sir John Pettis, Mr. Hall, Mr. Hammond, Mr. Catlin, and my dear bully boy, a lot of malcontents. So again, as I say, I really like this fella. He's not actually taken this situation very seriously. I was once asked if you could have half a dozen people from history to locally to come and join you for a meal and a drink, I'd invite this guy, because I from what little he writes to his wife, I like his letters, in not just the ones from when he's a prisoner, but his letters to his wife when he's in London at times are quite hilarious. He seems like a nice guy. If you could click me one more time, please, Paul. We've just got one more bit to come up there. Apparently, after a while, their accommodation in Windsor improves, and he tells them that they get a feather bed, 2 bolsters, 2 pillows, 2 blankets, a rug, a bedstead, a mat, a cord curtain rod, curtains and a valance, 2 chamber pots and a stool, another feather bed, 1 bolster, 1 pillow, 1 blanket, a coverlet, a mat and cord, a pair of sheets, 2 pillow bears, a towel, 2 napkins, a basin, a skillet, a brass candlestick, and a short form. So apparently this is the household necessities that the prisoners are being supplied with during their incarceration. If you could just click me to the next slide, please. Then they're still there probably in the September of that year. And I'll come to this bit in a minute. I just want to say that the idea that malcontents, or the people that were anti-Parliament and were thought to be on the side of the royalists, if they were thought to, like the Lowestoft men were, or the men arrested in Lowestoft rather, were thought to be malcontents and a threat to Parliament, they could have their estates sequestered. That is, they could be taken away from them and put in the hands of parliamentarians, and they could lose everything. And on the 13th of September 1643, the House of Commons ordered the sequestration of those gentlemen of Suffolk that were taken in arms acting against Parliament at Lowestoft. And the guy who was ordered to do this, who was actually a Great Yarmouth man, he was the recorder of Great Yarmouth, also the recorder at King's Lynn, and he seems to have had a finger in the pie running Southwold as well. This very strict Puritan, Miles Corbett. And the document you see in the background is the death warrant of Charles First from 6 years later. On the left you can see the signature of Oliver Cromwell, and the bottom right hand corner you can see Miles Corbett's signature. Miles Corbett was one of the regicides after Charles II was restored to the throne in 1660, and they hunted the regicides down. Corbett actually fled and escaped to the continent, but was eventually captured, tried for treason, and he was hung, drawn, and quartered in London a couple of years later. That's an aside to this story. Don't really know. I haven't been able to come across the documentation of what happened. Petter finally, who was arrested, he eventually seems to have had his estates restored to him. I tried high and low, and I think without a visit to the National Archive, I'll never be able to find out exactly what the outcome of this story is as far as sequestration. Did any of the Lowestoft men arrested get back? Yeah, they did. We know Jacob Rose was back here by 1646. So it looks as if they were kept in prison for a fair while, or kept locked up anyway. Whether they stayed at Windsor Castle, I haven't been able to find out. Hopefully one day I can. But we're not quite come to the end of the story as yet. Basically, that's all I've been able to glean about the Cromwell's visit to Lowestoft. Miles Corbett, if you're ever in Great Yarmouth, if you just flicker to the next slide, please, Paul. This is the house that Miles Corbett lived in Great Yarmouth at the north end of the marketplace, just along a little way from the school that overlooks the marketplace. And this is Miles Corbett's house in Great Yarmouth. For those of you who are interested in local witch trials, Miles Corbett, in actual fact, sat in on the witch trials of the Great Yarmouth witches, Matthew Hopkins' victims in 1645-46, also at King's Lynn, and a friend of mine has almost certainly ascertained that he was involved in a trial or a case in South Wales as well. But so that's where Miles Corbett lived. So we just move on. I mentioned the curfew bell at the beginning of this talk. Oh yeah, finally, Lowestoft eventually had a big lawsuit with Great Yarmouth. Once the king got back on the throne, 1662-63, Lowestoft was still at loggerheads with Yarmouth about fishing rights and all sorts of things. That in itself is another story. But they weren't, this is what, 20 years after Cromwell came here, they weren't adverse to sending a petition to the king saying how poor the town was, and one of the reasons they put, and whereas your petitioners are exceedingly impoverished by reason of our said controversy and their sufferings during the late troubles, i.e. the Civil War, their affections to your Majesty's late royal father of ever blessed memory, creep creep, having been plundered by Oliver Cromwell and the said inhabitants of Lowestoft, who were instrumental with the inhabitants of Yarmouth, who were instrumental with and assisted him in the same. So what they're saying is, look, we were on your side. We've been on your side, on your dad's side as well. And that nasty Oliver Cromwell came here and looted the town and took so much stuff away, and we're impoverished, and these damn people at Yarmouth were involved in it as well. So can you do something about the problems we had with Great Yarmouth? And that did eventually get sorted out, but that's a different story. So we pass on from that now to the next slide, please. Lowestoft's Curfew Bell. This is quite an interesting little aside. I put for who and why did the bell toll. Now, Lowestoft, the town hall, there is hanging in the tower. I don't think it rings anymore now. But hanging in the tower, there is a bell known as the Curfew Bell, and it's been there for hundreds of years, not just in this town hall, but in the predecessors of our recent town hall. And if you could just click me through to the next slide, please. And all sorts of accounts have been written about it. It's not a controversy, it's never been a controversy, I suppose, but the vital question is, why did we have a curfew bell in Lowestoft? What was the purpose of the curfew bell? Who ordered a curfew to be run? Obviously, I'm sure you know, a curfew is when the powers that be in a country or a town or a city or an area say, right, by a certain time of the day, usually in the early evening, everybody's got to be back in their houses. They're not allowed out on the street. And it has been conjectured that this actually, the curfew bell, was ordered to be rung by Oliver Cromwell when he was here. And the curfew bell was always rung at 8 o'clock. Now, the odd thing is, and it does make you wonder if this actually is a curfew enforced by Cromwell. Traditionally, it was always rung at 8 o'clock every evening, except on a Sunday when it was rung at 8 o'clock in the morning. Why you would have a curfew that starts at 8 in the morning and lasts presumably all day is not certain. There is another reason, another possibility that this isn't associated with Cromwell. I'll come on to that in a moment. If we could just change slides again, please, Paul. I consider myself to be lucky because this is up in the clock tower under the bell, the belfry, and the gentleman there, you can see he's pulling a piece of string. It's a very poor quality photograph. That's attached to the curfew bell, and he's ringing it. When I first moved up to this end of town in the late 1980s, I made friends with Mr. Ivan Gentle, I think his name was, who was the mayor's officer there. And I got talking to him one day about various things. I mentioned the curfew bell, and he said to me, would you like to come and ring the curfew bell tonight? So I actually went in there and pulled a bit of string and rung the curfew bell. Now, if we move to the next slide, please. So here's the curfew bell itself, and that's this Gentle there. And you can see it's quite a crude arrangement to ring the bell. But there is a dispute or a debate, or there was in the printed stuff that I showed you, about how you rung the bell. If at 8 o'clock tonight we rung the curfew bell in Lowestoft, the date is the 3rd of August 2020. So one version says you ring the bell thus. You ring it 20 times for the year and then pause. Then you ring it 8 times for the month and a slight pause. Then 3 times for the date. Another version, the one that Mr. Gentle told me, was that you take the year, 20, the month, the 8th month, and the day, the 3rd, and you add them together, and I see I've got my maths wrong there. It should be run not 32 times, it should be run 31 times. If 3 and 8 and 11, and you add that to 20, you get 31. It must have been a senior moment when I typed that. So those are the two methods of ringing the curfew bell. I don't know. Again, this is a real bother to me because I really would like to know more about it, but I can't find out that much at all. I asked Mr. Jenkin when I first met him why you rung the curfew bell every night, and he said it had been rung for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I said, well, why do you still ring it? He said, well, nobody ever told us to stop. But apparently it was supposedly first rung again in 1644. Now, if we go to the next slide, please. We have to go for a slight tangent here. We'll come back to the bell in a moment, and we'll have a bell with us when we do. In 1643 and 1644, Parliament ordered ordinances, these instructions, for certain things. And 1643 November, and again in May 1644, they set out ordinances. Remember, parliamentarians were basically Puritans. They totally against the Roman Catholic way of things, and their ordinances said that they appointed one man. If we could just click slides for me, please. The Earl of Edward Montagu, the second Earl of Manchester. He was ordered to appoint people all over the kingdom to go out and break down in all parish churches and strip them out and throw them away and smash anything that smacked of idolatry and popish ways. And the man he appointed to do in Suffolk was this gentleman, William Dowsing, who was a very strict Puritan. He was actually born and lived in Laxfield in Suffolk. He was appointed to do it. He did the whole of the county, apart from this little corner of Mutford Lothing Land, where he appointed a man whose picture I can't find, probably because he wasn't that important. His name was Francis Jessup. He came from Beccles. There is a little bit about him, but we're not ready about. So he came to Lowestoft and went into the church and took out mostly brasses and defaced anything else that he could. And if we just click to the next slide, this is Jacob Rouse again, writing in the parish register. And again, I've highlighted the passage there. You can't read it too well. Hopefully this is all kind of following on. The bit above tells us about a great fire that took place in Lowestoft around about this time, 1646, this is written here. And he says that in that same year, 1644, also on the 12th of June, there came one Jessup with a commission from the Earl of Manchester to take away from gravestones all inscriptions on which he found the Latin orate per anima, which means in English, pray for the soul of, which is, you don't do that if you're a Puritan. He describes Jessup as a wretched commissioner, not able to read or find out which his commission enjoined him to remove. He took up in our church so much brass as he sold to Mr. Josiah Wilde for 5 shillings. Now here's the interesting bit, which was afterwards, contrary to my knowledge, so he didn't have any knowledge that this was happening, it was made into a little bell that hangs in the townhouse. And Gillingwater says the bell is marked, John Bland made me, 1644, which is the same year, some sources say, is when they started to ring the curfew bell. We don't know whether that's 1644 old style or new style. If you remember, I said once, up until the middle of the 18th century, the year didn't end on December the 31st, but it went through, I think it was to March the 27th. So March 1644, for instance, if you use the old style, it's actually 1645. If you use new style, ending December, it is actually 1644. It's a little bit complicated how they do it. So we know that when Jessup came here, he ripped out the brasses, he sold them to Josiah Wilde. Josiah Wilde had a little bell made from them. How little or big the bell was, we don't know. It hangs in the townhouse. Okay? And it's got engraved on it, John Brand made me, 1644. John Brand and his dad, William Brand, lived in Norwich, and they were quite well-known bell founders in Norwich. So it all hangs together that Josiah Wilde sent the brass from the church to be made in the bell that hung into the townhouse. It's a pity he didn't say to be rung as a curfew bell. That's too much to hope for, isn't it? So there's the bell, guys. If we go back to the next slide, please. Not back, yeah. So as I said, is this the bell that John Brand made in Norwich? Unfortunately, we'll never know, because we're informed by Greenwater that the original bell that John Brand made from the brasses became flawed and cracked and had to be melted down and recast again. And this time there's no name on it. So again, here's the conundrum, if you like. Is this bell the original curfew bell? Is this the bell that John Brand of Norwich made from the melted down brasses from St Margaret's Church? Or is it just another bell? And again, as I said, for who the bell tolls. Was it a curfew bell to keep people off the streets when Oliver Cromwell's here? A bell that continued to be rung long after Cromwell departed, because nobody told the people of Lowestoft to stop ringing the bell. There is another theory that at this time, in 1644, there was a great fire in Lowestoft, a dreadful fire. Which destroyed a lot of property in the High Street, and it has been conjectured that the curfew bell was rung not to keep people off the streets, but at 8 o'clock in the evening to warn them to extinguish the fires in their hearths in case of another fire. Bearing in mind, much of the property in Lowestoft at that time was timber frame and thatched. I don't know. I'd like to think it's Cromwell's curfew bell. It's certainly called the curfew bell, but the curfew for what, we don't really know. So anyway, that's Lowestoft curfew bell. If we just pop on to the next slide for me, please. So the curfew bell, here's we don't know what the townhouse looked like in 1643, 44. The old Chapel of Ease, as it was called, was demolished and replaced by a chapel and town chamber built in 1698. So this is the 1698 chapel, and then that cupola at the top, presuming we've got the curfew bell hanging. If we go to the next slide, the townhouse in actual fact was demolished, and the Lowestoft's first town hall was built in 1859 with a little bell tower. This is on the site of the original townhouse, which is on the site of the Chapel of Ease and the townhouse dating from the early 1600s and before. This was built in 1859. We move on again. Please, to the next slide. The 1859 town hall was rebuilt in 1899, and here you can see the 1899 town hall frontage. I could never find a front view of this one, but again, there's the clock tower with the bell hanging in it, and of course that brings us to the present day town hall. This town hall you see here was demolished, and the street was widened in the early 1900s, probably for the trams. So if we can change slides again, please, Paul. And so here's the town hall that we know today, still with its bell tower, still with its clock, and with a curfew bell still hanging inside it. The kind of curfew bell more or less disappears. It doesn't appear. The last mention really in the press that I've been able to find, if we just switch to the penultimate slide, is this from the Lowestoft Journal, 29th of September 1989, where it says, chime, dreadful newspaper, aren't they? Chime for a change, the curfew bell goes electric. And there's a picture there of a local electrician actually making the curfew bell automatic. Now, whether he had the means back in 1989 to program the machine that was going to ring it, to ring out the date as it had done traditionally, we don't know. And then kind of from that point on, the curfew bell seems to get forgotten. I presume it's still hanging there today. Earlier this week, I wandered along the road at 8 o'clock, and certainly the bell chimed, but the clock, at least the face of the clock that I saw where I was standing, the clock seems to be broken, because it was set at 12 o'clock, midday or midnight, but the bell did ring, but it just rung out a number of chimes and then stopped. There was no rhyme, no reason to it. So they're talking about doing wonderful things with our town hall at Lowestoft as part of the Heritage Action Zone, and focusing on the history. I would love to think that at some point in the future we will hear our curfew bell, for whatever reason it was intended in the first place, start to chime out the date at 8 o'clock every evening. That is actually fact, I think, brought me to the end of my talk this evening. Just click the slide again before we call. I can't remember if I had a complete one. Yeah, and there is the town hall that one day will be restored to all its glory. And again, a picture I took only a couple of years back, and things have changed around there again. And that's to say, hopefully one day, sitting up in that bell tower, we will have the curfew bell and the stories and legends that go with it, and it will be rung at it rings out the date at 8 o'clock. And also, hopefully, because it's associations with Oliver Cromwell, correct or incorrect associations, we'll never know unless we can find some document that tells us he ordered it to be ring. At least when it rings, it will be, as I say, rightly or wrongly, or incorrectly or correctly, a link back to the day that Oliver Cromwell and his soldiers came to Lowestoft. And that certainly is my last slide. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ivan. That was fantastic, as always.
Thank you.
And yeah, I was particularly interested in the story of the day that Cromwell came to Lowestoft. I know lots of other people have been interested in it as well. Chris Collins said, I spy the Reverend John Quash of Gillingham St Mary. Never heard the name of Quash before, except in John's family history. There are several Quash family members. Martha Quash is one. Would love to know more, Ivan. Well, that sounds to me like a good opportunity for Chris to search the archives herself and and get involved in some family history. I know there's lots of local family history groups that could help out and encourage Chris to take a foray into that.
Oh.
So that would be my recommendation to you.
Yeah, that's good.
There's also
sorry, if I can just say, as well that the talks I hope people find entertaining and interesting, but if they can also motivate people to think, I'd like to find out more myself about that, even, more the better.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I mean, that's it. It's just the perfect opportunity, really, isn't it? When something's piqued your interest, to have a good delve into it yourself is perfect. Jerry Paul said, "I love the fact that it carried on because nobody told them to stop." I think she means the curfew bell, not you and I.
Yeah.
It's an very interesting fact that. But I guess sometimes with bureaucracy, it's the lack of bureaucracy that can really show it up sometimes. Chris Collins, one more thing she said was, Ivan, I had never heard of the curfew bell before and found the backstory absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much for tonight. 5 stars, 100%, and 3 rounds of applause, which is very lovely of you, Chris. Steve Fingleton said, the town hall is a lovely building, beautiful stained glass windows. I have been in the bell tower. It's a very narrow staircase. That's from Steve Fingleton. Well, thank you very much, Steve. Yeah, a lovely building, absolutely. And there's so many around our town. Well, around, you only really have to open your eyes for a short time to find in any part of our wonderful country. So some really interesting architecture, and there's always plenty of stories behind, as I'm sure you agree. Ivan is perfect at demonstrating that. We hear from Anne Benz, who says, thank you, Ivan. And we hear from Linda Boyce, who says, all very interesting. Thank you, Ivan. Oh, and Chris Collins has just typed in, thank you, I will. So I think we may have a convert to some family history right there in Chris Collins. Before we go, if you don't mind, Ivan, I'm just going to mention the Tuesday night broadcast that Stephen and I do. Because this on a Monday night is very much about Lowestoft and the history of Lowestoft in some wonderful bite-sized sessions as presented by Mr. Ivan Bunn, and I know that you've all enjoyed that immensely. On a Tuesday night, we have a lot less history, but we do talk about the history, and particularly the histories pertinent to the particular sea shanties and maritime songs that Stephen and I present to you. We always have a guest, so. There's lots to enjoy on a Tuesday night, but added to that, this weekend, in fact, you could join the Rogues Shanty Boys. Now, this is a breakaway group. The Rogues Shanty Chorus is how we present a Tuesday night sing song to you, but this weekend you can join the Rogues Shanty Boys at a beautiful secret Suffolk hideaway for a very special online performance. It will be our first in several months, and I say our first because it's a group that Stephen and I are part of. The show will include not just the performance, but the chance to join us in an Access All Areas tour of our location prior to the show. You can chat with us beforehand, join us afterwards on Zoom for a backstage hangout and a question and answer session. You can even choose our set list in real time, all from the comfort and safety of your own home. So we really are encouraging you to come along, but to stay where you are and enjoy the performance that we would like to give to you. To get your tickets, just visit the link, which will show on the screen very shortly. You can pay via that link, and we will send you joining instructions. The past few months have been such an extraordinary time, but we cannot wait to perform for you, and we thank you so much for supporting us, not just by watching these history sessions on a Monday night with Ivan Bunn, but also you can, as I said, tune in on a Tuesday night to enjoy the shanty sessions. But you can support us further by purchasing tickets to watch online on this Saturday, the 8th of August, 7 p.m. for the pre-show, which starts at 6:30 p.m. Tickets are £7. That's an early bird offer until this coming Wednesday, the 5th of August. So sorry, Ivan, for the large advert. But I'm just going to mention a few more comments. from Sue Day. She said, really interesting about Cromwell tonight. Thank you. I know Sue really engages with history. She's mentioned lots of things to us. She's a keen advocate of many different things, as diverse as the Wherry Yacht Charters, and also well, lots of different things. So I'm not surprised she finds Cromwell interesting tonight, as I did too. Linda Boy says loves Tuesday evenings, but I think it's clear she also loves Monday evenings because she joins us, as far as I can tell, every single time, and very grateful we are too. Thank you very much. Now, Ivan, you did mention it briefly, but I'm just going to take us back to what you said regarding next Monday. Now, next Monday is the 10th. And I believe you said you'll be talking about a history of Alton Broad and a very broad history. Just remind me of the dates, the years that you were going to touch upon.
Alton Broad as a off the top of my head now. Hang on, I've got to get my Alton Broad brain in the gear now. Alton Broad didn't exist as a place, as an entity, a self-governing body. I think it was 1906. Before then, Alton Broad was the water. Right. So if you were in Alton or Carlton Colville, either side, and you said you lived in you lived in Lowestoft, you said, and you said, I'm now going to walk through Alton Broad in 1850, they would have pictures of you wading through the broad water, because there's no place called Alton Broad. So what my talk is going to be is going to be, first of all, the origins of Alton Broad, not the place called Alton Broad, but the body of water, the broad water known as Alton Broad.
Right.
I'm going to start roughly 12,000 years ago. I can't quite remember that far back, and I'm going to work forward to see what happened in the geology and everything else, and the sea levels, to create that water we now know as Alton Broad, and at the same time see how the community slowly grew up on the Carlton Colville side and the Alton side, and led to the creation eventually as a small corporate entity, a self-governing body called Alton Broad, which didn't last very long because it became part of Lowestoft. So that's what I intend to do. And I'm going to do it in two parts because it does get a little bit, not complicated, but there's, as you'd appreciate, quite a lot of detail, especially in the early history. So I'm going to do in two segments. One, the Monday the 10th, and then the second half on Monday the 17th. So I said last week, they've covered most parts of this area now. We've done Gunton, I've done Kirkley, touched on Pakefield, I've done the Lowestoft town itself, we've done the Lowestoft witches, and I think it was time that we put Alton Broad on the map as well. So that's what I'm going to be doing for the next 2 weeks, and I hope you all tune in and enjoy the talks as much as I enjoy giving them.
Well, we all do, Ivan. Thank you so much, and it really is it's testament to how much effort you put into the research and the preparation of the talk and the slide and the presentation as a whole. That so many people just join in, they tune in again and again and again continuously because they're fascinating, and I really can't wait for the Alton Broad one. I think I've enjoyed lots of days out at Alton Broad, on the Broad itself. I think for anybody who has, like myself, or perhaps you've lived there, or anybody who's just fascinated by the Lowestoft history as Ivan sets it out and is just waiting for that, almost that last link in the chain with Alton Broad. Like you said, Ivan, we've covered pretty much the rest of the surrounding areas, and this one will put Alton Broad on the map. I'm not surprised it's going to take 2 sessions because that's quite a broad history to cover. That really is. That, well, like I said, fascinating to go from so far back to its almost current form. It's going to be a great watch. So thank you very much. Just before we leave, though, Ivan, you mentioned about the session you did on the Lowestoft witches, and I just remind everybody that there are books that you can buy. If you've enjoyed, and I know you have, so if you've enjoyed these history sessions at all, then why not have a little look at the books that you can buy that Ivan has been part of. There's A Trial of Witches, which is co-written by Ivan. There's also George Borrow, Alton and Beyond, which would be very pertinent to the next couple of weeks. And there's also this fascinating one, A Return to Haunted Lowestoft, which is co-written by Ivan Bunn and Henry Baker. Finally, this one is The Trial of the Lowestoft Witches, a facsimile of the original report. Now, that features a foreword by our very own Ivan Bunn. These are available in all good bookshops. I should think I would highly recommend you pop down to your local bookstore or give them a call and find out if they can get them in for you. But certainly Waterstones have them if you don't have a local bookshop. So you get them where you can, but do get them because I know you'll enjoy them very much. Ivan, once again, thank you so much, and really looking forward to next week.
Yep, thank you, Paul. Thank you, for another interesting session. Thanks for the advert for the books. As I said, the Return to Haunt of Lowestoft, or Haunt Lowestoft Revisited, it should be, that has quite a definitive story of the trial of the Lowestoft witches in the back of it, which, if you're interested in the witchcraft trial, I know you'll like. And the facsimile is in actual fact a complete facsimile of the original trial report. I thought I had a copy behind me, but I haven't. I've got so much rubbish, there's probably one here somewhere. Yeah, so yeah, thanks thanks for everything. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for support. Thank you, everybody who's tuned in tonight again. And just
great.
Good night. Take care and stay safe out there, as I say.
Thanks, Ivan. And I'll just finish with these last two comments. One's from Chris Collins. Thanks, everyone, and see y'all tomorrow. I think she means for the Sea Shanty sessions, the Rogues Shanty Chorus on a Tuesday night. And Steve Bingleton, thanks, Ivan. Much enjoyed. You too, Steve. Thanks. Take care, everybody. Good night, Ivan.
Thank you.